Hello and welcome to this edition of Power 5 Picks. I'm Drew Goldfarb, and in this series, we're taking a look at games across each of the Power 5 conferences and giving you our betting picks. Our experts and I will each have a budget of $100 a week, and we can bet it on the spread or on the money line for each of our featured games. We each have to bet a full $100 every week, and we have to bet on all 5 of the games that we're featuring. For this show, I'm joined by Taylor Smith and Jim Beviglia. Week 4 saw Taylor record the first 5 for 5 week, which we're going to say earns him the first scholarship of the year. So Taylor, what that means is that you don't get paid for the week. Any money that you generate goes to our parent company, and in return, you get an education. But you're going to have to work so frequently for free for the parent company that there's no way that you get to capitalize on that education in the slightest. So congratulations.
Much appreciated.
There you go. All right. Well, in week 4, Notre Dame fell on the road to Georgia, but kept the Bulldogs from covering the spread. In week 5, the Fighting Irish favored against Virginia in our featured ACC matchup of the week. Irish favored by 11.5 points this week. Minus 440 moneyline favorites. The Cavaliers come with plus 345 odds on a bet to win straight up. Jim, get us started with your pick here.
Yeah, you guys know I picked Notre Dame on the money line last week, and I had a shot late. That's all you could ask for with those kind of odds. Interesting game here. You know, Virginia's unbeaten, going to Notre Dame, who's coming off a very tough battle against Georgia. Virginia was probably looking ahead last week when they played Old Dominion because that was kind of an ugly win. Virginia had a win at Pitt that looks a lot better now than it did when they won that game. I mean, Pitt's just beat Central Florida. They took Penn State to the hilt, and Virginia beat them on the road handily. Neither team has much of a running game going. The quarterback for both teams is either the leading rusher or very close to the leading rusher. So it's going to come down to which team passes the ball better. Notre Dame probably has an edge there, but Virginia has a really good secondary led by Bryce Hall. Notre Dame's not the kind of team, it feels like to me, that covers big spreads. They kind of grind out wins if they do get them. So not super confident about this, but I like the point spread with Virginia. I'm going to go plus 11.5 Virginia, and I'm going to make it a $15 wager.
Taylor, what about you?
I didn't love this one either. Notre Dame obviously looked pretty good last week. I think they kind of surpassed some expectations at Georgia. Virginia kind of squeaked by Old Dominion. They had a tough game against Florida State a couple weeks ago before that. So Notre Dame at home here. It's a big spread. I don't love it, but I'm going to take the Irish to cover it. I'm going to put 20 on it.
I'm going to be doing the same thing. Notre Dame prevented UGA from covering the spread last week, and that was the only thing that kept me from earning the scholarship for the week instead of you, Taylor. But the Irish led at halftime in that game. The Notre Dame defense looked pretty solid against the Bulldog offense. Virginia is 4-0 with wins over Pitt, and Florida State is their biggest thus far. UVA trailed 17-0 to Old Dominion in the second quarter a week ago. Maybe they were looking ahead, but they didn't lead in that game at any point until the 4th. Notre Dame should bounce back well this week. They had a really good performance 1 week ago. I like them to cover the spread. I'm going to take the Irish on the spread, and just like Taylor, I'm doing it for $20. After Michigan was rocked last week by Wisconsin, the Big Ten East Division seems to be Ohio State's to lose. The Buckeyes visit Nebraska this weekend. They're going to be favored big time on the road. Buckeyes massive 18-point favorites against the Cornhuskers, paying off at minus 115 odds on the OSU side, minus 105 odds on the Nebraska side. On the money line, Ohio State a minus 1,000 favorite, while the Huskers coming at plus 665. Taylor, who do you like for this matchup?
Ohio State hasn't played a close game yet. Nebraska is 3-1, but just 1-3 against the spread. The game being in Lincoln certainly gives me pause, but Ohio State should just look great. They've won their games by 24, 42, 41, and 71. The Huskers are the toughest test they'll have faced to this point, but I feel good about Ohio State. Huge spread, but I think they can deliver on that. So I'll put 25 on the Buckeyes to cover it.
This pick really comes down to whether or not Nebraska can keep the game from becoming a blowout or not. I don't believe the Buckeyes are going to lose, and I'm not taking them at a dramatic minus 1,000 on the money line, so it comes down to the spread. Against Florida Atlantic, Cincinnati, Indiana, and Miami of Ohio, the Buckeyes have outscored their opponents 214 to 36 on the year. Huskers should be much better than any of those teams this season, but they haven't exactly lit it up this year either. They've only won by 14 against South Alabama and by 4 against Illinois, and they lost to Colorado in week 2. their 44-8 win over Northern Illinois, and the fact that this game is being played in Lincoln are the only things keeping me from betting the bank on OSU to cover. Even still, going to take the Buckeyes to cover the spread. I'm going to make it that average bet of $20. Jim, how are you betting on this one?
I'm going to play the contrarian here. Last year Nebraska took Ohio State to the hilt, and Nebraska was not a very good team last year. Ohio State was Ohio State just as they are this year. And that was at Ohio State. It was a very close game. Ohio State had a hard time controlling Adrian Martinez, who, of course, is back as the Nebraska quarterback, putting up big numbers again. Ohio State looks like a superstar team. They've got stars everywhere, Justin Fields and Dobbins, the running back, and Chase Young, who's got 7 sacks already. But Nebraska, Scott Frost there, they need that signature win. I'm not crazy about Ohio State taking the spread, so I figure why not go for it here. I'm going to go $10 on Nebraska. I'm going to do it on the money line for plus 665, I believe.
Looking for that big $66.50 payout. It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
Sir.
Let's see if it pays off. In the Pac-12, we've got a matchup of one-loss teams that have each suffered bad beat defeats this season. USC rebounded from a 3-point loss to BYU 2 weeks ago to upset 10th-ranked Utah last week. Washington, meanwhile, bounced back from a Week 2 loss to Cal with back-to-back blowout wins over Hawaii and that same BYU team. Huskies favored by 10 points at home, minus 110 on both sides there. They're minus 355 moneyline favorites, taking the Trojans to win would pay out at plus 285 odds. I'm going first for this one, and this game got a lot more interesting after last week, didn't it? USC pulled the upset against Utah a week after losing to BYU. Washington, meanwhile, destroyed Brigham Young on the road. And with this game being played at Husky Stadium and with Trojans freshman quarterback Keaton Slovis being knocked out of last week's game with a concussion, all signs are pointing to a Washington win. That said, redshirt junior Matt Fink played incredibly well at QB for the Trojans after Slovis went down, so all hope is not lost for USC. Washington quarterback Jacob Eason, meanwhile, had a fantastic game against BYU, completing over 85% of his passes. His completion percentage for the season sits at just over 73%, and his touchdown-interception ratio is 10-2. Part of me still wants to take a small flyer on USC to win, kind of taking a little bit of page out of Jim's book there, but I can't go against Eason and the Huskies at these odds at home. With the Washington offense looking the way it is this season, I'm going to take the Huskies to cover the spread, but I'm only going to put $15 on this game. Jim, what's your pick?
Yeah, one thing about the Pac-10, I don't know how good it is, but man, those games are exciting. You just don't know what's going to happen from week to week with these teams. I compared the two teams having played BYU, and obviously BYU beat USC. Washington handled BYU pretty easily there. I think Washington, since they had that kind of ugly loss the first week where it was kind of that crazy game, Taylor referenced it last week, there was that long weather delay. I think they've kind of righted the ship. Jacob Eason looks really good. I feel like USC, at some point the air raid runs into a defense that can handle it. Washington's handled good passing attacks all year long. So I feel good with Washington. I'm going to go with Washington minus the 10 points, and I'm going to make it a $25 wager.
Taylor.
I will be making it unanimous and copying Jim's wager amount of 25 on the Huskies. They've looked legit since that weird loss against Cal. Kind of looks like an anomaly at this point. USC, like Drew said, maybe down to a third-string quarterback. He obviously doesn't look terrible, but still a third-string quarterback for a reason, potentially. Slovis could still play with that concussion, but we'll see. USC has been like the most unpredictable team in the nation, so it gives me a little bit of pause. But I think Washington at home, and it's not a huge spread. I think it's a decent one, so I'll take Washington to cover.
In the SEC, the Auburn Tigers picked up a road win against Texas A&M 1 week ago, knocking the Aggies down to number 23 in the AP rankings. Tigers now ranked 7th in the nation. They host 3-1 Mississippi State this weekend. The Bulldogs lost to Kansas State 2 weeks ago, bouncing back to beat Kentucky last week. Auburn favored by 11 with a minus 115 payout on the Tigers side of the spread, minus 105 on the MSU side. On the money line, Auburn posting at minus 435, Mississippi State at plus 345. Taylor, how are you betting on this matchup?
Auburn's been good to me. 2-0 with my Auburn picks. They're 4-0 straight up and against the spread. They were dominant last week in College Station for most of the game. Mississippi State's already lost at home to Kansas State this season. They look like they're kind of underwhelming overall. It's another weird spread, 11 points. It's kind of awkward, but I'll still take Auburn to cover this thing at home. I'll put $20 on the Tigers.
This one's easy for me. I'm taking Auburn to cover the spread. I picked the Tigers last week on the road against Texas A&M. And while the risk of a hangover game is certainly possible, I don't think it's going to happen here. Mississippi State's wins are over Louisiana Lafayette, Southern Miss, and Kentucky, and they lost by 7 to K-State. Auburn's worst win this season is at least close to on par with MSU's best win this year. The Tigers should win this game. I'm going to put $35 on this one that they will be covering the spread in this contest against the Bulldogs. Jim.
Well, as you can see, Max, my dog, has joined us for this pick, and so I should be picking Mississippi State, being it's the Bulldogs. Last year, Mississippi State handled Auburn pretty well. They ran all over them. They're kind of in between quarterbacks. I think they're probably better off with Garrett Schrader, who is more of a running quarterback, than Tommy Stevens, who's kind of a passing guy. And that said, Mississippi State had an awful time handling the run against Kansas State. Auburn probably bullies them in that way, and I think Auburn's defense is much better against the run this year. They have a tough defensive line. So I think this game stays close for a while, but then Auburn wears them down, and I think they can handle that spread. So I'm going to go with Auburn minus the 11 points, and I'm going to make it a $20 wager.
I appreciate the unintentional pun of using the mascot for Mississippi State, Bully, in the description of what Auburn is going to do to Mississippi State. That was very well done. Wrapping up with the Big 12, the Baylor Bears 3-0 on they're taking on the Iowa State Cyclones, who are 2-1. Neither has played an in-conference game this season prior to this weekend's meeting in Waco, Texas. Cyclones favored by 2.5 points, paying at minus 115 on the Iowa State side, minus 105 on the Bears side. As far as the money line goes, ISU comes in at minus 140. Baylor available at plus 120. So, Jim, who will win this week's Big 12 conference matchup?
Yeah, Baylor is the team that we just have no idea. I mean, they have played nobody. They are 3-0, but I mean, they kind of had a tough game with Rice, who I think was 1-11 last year. So that's a bit of a concern. Whereas Iowa State has been tested. I mean, Iowa State, you could argue that they should be unbeaten, just a freak kind of punt return play against Iowa State or against Iowa, where they fumble the football, they get the ball back there, they might win that game. So they've had a real test. They have Brock Purdy coming off video game numbers in his last game. I think the comparison here, Baylor last year started out 2-0 with 2 kind of cupcake wins, and then they got pounded by Duke the first time they played anybody decent. So that all gives me pause with Baylor. I feel really confident about this one. I'm going to go with Iowa State minus the 2.5, and I'm going to put it $30 on that.
Taylor?
That makes me feel good because this, I thought, was the hardest game of the week. Obviously, the tightest spread that we have. But like you said, Rice is not a good team. Baylor struggled to beat them on the road last week. Baylor is a bit of a wild card. I personally can't stand Baylor, which makes this pick easier, a little bit easier for me. I'll take Iowa State as well, the value against the spread, and I'll put $10 on it.
Baylor struggled against Rice last week. They've got crushing wins over Stephen F. Austin and UT San Antonio. Iowa State snuck past North Iowa in week 1. Lost by 1 to Iowa in week 2, destroyed Louisiana Monroe most recently. Neither of these teams has really proven themselves to be great. I don't think they've proven themselves to be great, good, bad, or awful. They've just proven that they have enough players to play football. So I'm going to keep this wager really low. I don't think the stats this season really demonstrate much because of the lack of competition that these teams have faced against their respective schedules. That said, I'm going to be the contrarian here. I'm going to take Baylor to win straight up because they have the better value of the two teams on the money line, and they lack a loss this season. I'm just going to put $10 on it, but you know what? I'm just looking for that little bit better than 1-to-1 payout odds. That, for me, is really the difference maker in my pick here. And that's going to do it for this edition of Power 5 Picks. Make sure to check back next week where we'll have another full slate of games and another full plate of picks. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the Odds On Favorites YouTube channel, check out Jim's dog, and let us know which bets you take for this week's games down in the comments below. For Jim Beviglia and Taylor Smith, I'm Drew Goldfarb. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. That was your dog popping up, right?
Yeah, he usually sits on my lap and you can't see him, but this time he jumped up, and so I was like, oh well, I'm not even going to try to hide it.
Wow. I didn't realize that that you had your dog sitting in your lap for every one of these recordings.
Yeah, like the last couple weeks, that's what he does. He sits on my lap, and so usually you can't see him, but this time he jumped up. So I was like, oh well, let's make him Max.
Max.
Doing Max's lock of the week as a segment.
We might have
seriously.
to. He's famous.